And I'm gonna remind us we are Watershed Solutions Network, which we are because we're embracing the systems of things. And you can't manage water if you're not also managing land and a whole bunch of other things, and vice versa. Um, so so I also think that we're lucky that we have Watershed Solutions Network where it's embedded in what we do and how we do things. Systems thinking is. And also we have a group of folks who I think you have to have been a little bit of a change maker if you joined WSN to begin with. And so we're kind of the right crowd to be digging into this and trying to imagine like where do things go from here? So if you can just take a quick look at that system that you are and have been drawing, and I just want to ask you a few questions about what you're drawing. How is it structured? Do you have things laid out linearly, or are they all over the page, or are they in a circle or a bunch of circles? Like what, how is the page laid out? And what things does your layout help you understand? And what things does your layout make invisible? Just take a minute to look at your drawing and think about that. And next up, is there motion in your drawing or is it static? And I'm not, maybe your drawing skills don't allow you to put something in motion, but when you were visualizing it, was there movement in what's on the page, or did you draw something sort of in a static snapshot? And if the drawing is static, what does that help you observe? And if the drawing has motion, what does that help you observe? Where are you in your drawing? Are you in it? Are you the actor? You drew it and you're outside of it? Are you everywhere in it? Are you at the center of it? Where are you in your drawing? And how does that vantage point influence what you see? And can you imagine shifting your location? And what might you see differently? I could go on all day. I'm going to stop there. Those are just a few key things. I think that what I'm hoping that you all are going to really experience and embrace in this next couple of hours is that the all of the skills you learned in Water Solutions Network, how to ask questions, how to be curious, like those are all the things that I want you to bring today and every day in your job, even though sometimes it's going to frustrate you and sometimes maybe most of the time it's going to frustrate the people around you. But if we don't take a step back and start asking ourselves some of these more foundational questions, it will be really challenging for us to find our way out of this historic moment. So I just want to say one quick thing about why this picture. So this is a picture actually of a place called Kawana Valley that some of you have been to. We did a forest gathering here. We did a natural resources training here. We have another one coming up in May. And I chose it intentionally because it does something that we often forget when we're sitting in our offices. And what it does is it reminds us that we are actually elements of a much broader natural system that is part of a much broader Earth system that is part of a much broader stellar system that maybe and then who knows what's beyond that, right? We've got our universe and there may be multiverses and there's a lot, there are so many things, so many layers to all of this. But the one that humans inhabit best is the present moment in our present surroundings. And every layer we expand out from that, we're introducing error. So and when we were for cohort five, for all of you who are part of cohort five, this is why we sat in that meadow and we just paid attention to the meadow. We very often forget the things that are right in front of us because we're busy building abstractions. So that's the that I want us to remember that, and then to always question everything that's outside of that. I always like to start with with my take home message at the very beginning, so that those of you who are daydreaming about other things or tired or whatever, at least take this home. So there is no good or bad way of understanding things. That is something that for some reason we as humans, I don't know why. I'm sure there are philosophers who explain to us why it is that things have to be good and bad, that everything's a dichotomy. We are going to talk about systems thinking today. That does not mean that reductionist thinking is bad or wrong. It's a tool for a certain set of purposes. And I keep wondering how amazing humans could be if we could figure out how to deploy all of our ways of knowing things at the same time. So let's all just agree that we've been trained and our Western culture is very, very much overbalanced in the reductionist direction. But the goal isn't to eliminate it. The goal is to find balance. So systems thinking is great for considering interconnections, seeing things from a broader perspective. It's great for imagining things in motion because systems are by nature always in motion. And reductionist thinking, on the other hand, I mean, there are many major medical breakthroughs that we may never have found if we were always thinking from the systems perspective. It allows us to focus in on, if your car's not running, at some point you need to be a reductionist thinker so that you can figure out which piece is broken and fix that one. And so again, like let's together discover the power of being able to toggle among these things and figure out how to deploy the right tools at the right time. So some of you are should some of you should this should be old school because you did this in your cohort experience, and we have some folks. We should also point out, actually, and something we jumped over. We have some folks who are with us today who are friends who have WSN members who may be part of their organizations or friends or family who are participating, and I don't really know what they know. So we're starting from very basics. Once we get off the presentation, let's take a minute and have folks introduce themselves in the chat. But hold on that for the moment. But Alyssa or Angelica, if you can remind us when we pull the PowerPoint down to do some quick introductions, and apologies for leaping over that important step. So first off, what is a system? And I also, in addition to folks being on camera, I also invite you to not be on mute if you are in a place that's quiet enough to support that, because this is interactive. So what is a system? I would love for folks to leap in, especially our folks who've been pondering this for the last year and a half. What is a system?
Well, I'll jump in real quick. I think it's an assemblage of things that influence each other. So when you're trying to define problems, you want to make sure you're including all the things that have an impact on other things.
Yep. Anything else anyone would add to our definition? And Larry, you can feel free to join the conversation. What is a system, Larry?
Well, I would say that there is nothing that is not a part of a system. Okay. I mean, just look behind me, those chairs at the table back there. Those chairs are part of my office system, right? There is nothing that is not a part of a system. And Donella Meadows was a really terrific systems thinker 20 years ago. Unfortunately, she passed. She wrote a book called Thinking in Systems, and she gave a very simple definition of a system, and that is an interconnected set of elements that is coherently organized in a way that achieves something. So, it's a whole with parts, and those parts work together to do something. All right. And today I'm going to interchangeably use system and organization because they really like one and the same. Because a system is structured by organization, and an organization is structured by systems, right? So,
So Larry, does the system have to be organized? You said in Donnell Meadows, her definition, you said something about organized to accomplish something.
yes. So every system has a structure, and I would say that that structure represents organization. It's organized in some way, right?
So Larry, maybe are you focused on human systems?
It doesn't make any difference. I mean, you can look at that natural ecosystem, forest system out there. I mean, or your own human system, whether it be, we're systems within systems and systems. There's my circulatory system, my nervous system, etc. I mean, just I think it's just really unfortunate that science has gone to the extreme, especially in the Western world, and we have been so dominated and influenced by reductionist thinking. So we just don't think in more complex wholes and we don't think in systems. But everything, I would just put out here that everything is a system.
I think for me that what organized implies thoughtful, which implies human, which is why I asked the question. But I think what you're saying is that there is an order to everything. Organized maybe is a shorthand. And then the other thing that I just want to point out is order is not the same necessarily as organized because systems can be in chaos. And actually, one of the things that we have, that I keep telling folks, anyone who will listen, is actually if your job is systems change, chaos is actually where all of the opportunity lies. So I don't know, Larry, how we find that. I mean, I think what we're struggling with is human language to describe things that transcend humans. So I think we're saying the same thing, but using words that have subtext.
No, we are. And let me just say this because when I get to my part of the workshop and talk about chaotic, chaotic is a word that was coined by Dee Hock. Dee Hock was the founder and CEO emeritus of Visa, that little tiny credit card company. And he was a master of language, and he just loved to, well, he believed that language is not just the way that we communicate, but it's the way we think. So we really want to create, like, let's say, new types of organizations, then we really have to use some new language to help us get out of the old bone box, right? The word chaotic comes from chaos and order. And complexity science tells us that living systems are neither totally chaotic nor are they totally ordered, but that there's some nice balance between chaos and order, and that all growth and evolution and change happens at that balance point between chaos and order.
So anything else anyone wants to add to our understanding of what a system is? And I cannot see everyone on
I
the
want
screen.
to add something.
Yeah,
I
go ahead,
think I think it's important for us to think about not only geographically related elements of those systems, but also chronologically through time. That is how we've been thinking in our group, at least in our work group, talking about water system planning and water management, watershed organization, and you think about the evolution of systems within a place. It's not just about the change that's happening today, but it's how do we get somewhere better in the future.
Yep, time matters. Again, motion. Systems are constantly in motion. So I would suggest that the foundational difference between how a reductionist approach thinks of things, I mean, it thinks of things, and systems are relationships. And so the focus is on how things are connected. That very highest level, that's what I think we could all agree on. And then why do systems matter? I mean, be pragmatic. Like when you're at work, why would a systems approach matter?
I can speak for my experience with the Army Corps. I think actions can have unintended consequences if you're not looking at it from a systems perspective.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah, and in
also,
my drawing, Debbie, sorry, Morgan, go ahead. Were you gonna
I
say
was going to
something?
say, yeah, I was going to say, I think also we all operate with limited time and resources, and sometimes we focus on the wrong part of the system that isn't the leverage point or the tipping point.
Yeah, that was sort of what I was thinking is in my drawing, Debbie, of my system that I'm familiar with, uh, I noted some what I call intervention points that are less obvious. And that's sort of where I've been working on this system improvement is in some of those less obvious intervention points that might have a bigger impact to the outcome that the system thinking work is trying to achieve. So it defines unintended consequences and also less than obvious solutions.
Yeah, so systems thinking can often be a good tool to pull out if you have your A plus B equals C and you do A plus B and it doesn't equal C. So you pulling out your systems thinking cap, zooming out and trying to figure out what other variables were at play. Systems thinking is a great tool for that kind of analysis. Um, Larry, do you want to run us through this slide? I know these were some key points that you wanted to make about systems thinking.
Um, well, I think I would say that in order to be an effective systems thinker, at least to me anyway, I think you need three things. One, you need to be able to see the big picture. You need to be able to think in wholes. And you need to be able to, as the first item here on the slide, you need to be able to see the interconnections and understand the relationships. And that second one, the holistic perspective, that's being able to see the bigger picture, right? And then complexity and dynamics is just the opposite of reductionist thinking. Um, and it's thinking about that complexity of the whole. And then in systems, there's always feedback loops because everything is all interconnected and they all relate to one another. So there are always feedback loops that are happening within systems. And finally, you need to be able to connect the dots, the parts of the system. Does that help?
Yep, that's great. Yeah, I would say again, like I was saying earlier, all of these elements are you can pull them into a reductionist way of seeing the world and then you just add, oh, so I said A plus B equals C, but it's really A times B plus you can add interactions mathematically. You can kind of zoom out by adding more variables. Where it kind of starts to break down though is when you're trying to appreciate complexity and dynamics and feedback loops. So so I also just want to make sure everyone realizes that there are like we're saying systems thinking, and what it is actually culturally evolving over time. So what systems thinking was in 1900, because it actually did exist even all the way back to 1900, is a little different than it is today. And if you just take just like everything in systems thinking, if you just take each of these individually, you could feel like, oh, I'm doing systems thinking from inside my reductionist structure. But real systems thinking is messy. If it doesn't feel messy, you're probably not doing it. So, and if it feels like everybody in your organization is on board, then you've probably re-articulated your system into something that's a little more reductionist. If you've got lots of arrows that go from left to right, you've probably created something a little more reductionist. Again, none of this is bad. And we need to be bridging. Like we can't expect to walk into a conference room with people who have been trained up as reductionist thinkers and then lay out the messy, complicated systems that are related to whatever it is you're talking about in the room and expect that people are going to applaud you. They're going to ask you, why are you wasting my time? So, but I think it's important for us as an organization to keep refining what we understand systems thinking to be and keep expanding how we apply it. And ultimately, for me, I was telling our planning team for this workshop, for me, the optimum system is our natural systems that we are all interdependent with. And when I asked you to think about how you draw things, and where are you in the picture, humans are often outside of our system. When we draw a natural system, we are often outside of it. We often see ourselves as separate from. And the more that we can expand our thinking to appreciate and embody the broader systems approach and challenge every turn we take that tries to fit that back into a reductionist approach, the closer I think we're going to get to human resilience.
Debbie, if I could just add, you
Sure.
know, you don't need to overthink systems thinking. And I'm going to throw something out here that you folks can challenge me on, but I believe every system has a purpose and every system has a set of principles, operating principles. And I'm going to get back to that. Purpose and principles, I think, are really, really key to developing systems and to be able to think in systems.
So, Larry, I don't disagree with you, but I think that's a very strong human lens on it, and it's the human lens trying to analyze how do humans interact in and intervene in a system. So, like, how do we organize ourselves in order, because I'm pretty sure, though I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that our natural systems are not, no one sat around a table and said, well, what are our principles and what are our, I think you're building the bridge between humans and how we operate and our capacity to be good actors in a system.
Well, I said I was going to use systems and organizations interchangeably today. So organizations, and I'll say, or systems have a purpose and a set of principles. And I would think that even every natural system, if you look at it closely enough, you'll find a purpose and a set of some kind of, fundamental principles that are directing that system.
This is a deeper philosophical conversation that I would love to have with you. Let's
Right. Onward.
maybe this is the next workshop. But this is an important conversation because what this what this helps us to understand is the human place in systems. And I don't know if Bill, anyway, I think you, Larry, me, and Bill should have a longer conversation about all of that. Um, and
Let
I'm
me
so,
just ask you this question. So the circulatory system in my body, does it not have a purpose and does it not have a set of principles that govern that system?
I would say that we could arbitrarily interpret purpose and principles, but that my guess is, if you think from a cosmic perspective, my guess is that I could also explain why those are arbitrary and why they may not be true. I mean, to be honest, I think that especially as we think about where we go from this historic moment, there's value in always questioning our assumptions, which is what I'm doing with you right now, Larry. It doesn't mean just because you take a step back and you ask yourself, are my assumptions, do they still fit? Doesn't mean they're wrong. It just means you're taking the moment to ask yourself, does this still apply? And I don't know if you all remember, but there's the iceberg model that was also part of most of your curriculum where you've got what you can see and then you've got all the stuff happening below the waterline, including your beliefs and your thinking. And we, we're humans, we believe and we think. So this is not it's the goal is to keep thinking and keep believing, but know that your thoughts and your beliefs can change too. And sometimes that's the most important part of the system that we as humans need to change. So some of the benefits of systems thinking, again, not because it's better or worse than reductionist thinking, but just some of the things that systems thinking is particularly helpful with. Sometimes problem solving can be informed by systems thinking. Again, we talked about this earlier, when you can take a step back and actually ask yourself, what, when you've narrowed into that smaller focus, what were the things that you left out? And are those playing a role in whatever it is that you're trying to do? Um, it can improve decision making. So often in our systems right now, we are a check the box society. So we issue you a permit, and as long as you did everything we said you were supposed to do, it actually doesn't entirely matter whether you produce the outcome that we designed all those check boxes to achieve. And so by taking a step back and looking at things through a systems lens, you can actually ask yourself, are all these assumptions we made about how our human behavior would produce a certain outcome true? And if they're not true, then what else is going on that's making them not true? And then it just always invites us to embrace the complexity. If you and I would also just say too, understanding systems is an ongoing process. It's not like you draw that picture you have on your desk right now. You could keep drawing that for the rest of your life, and you still will not have a full and complete comprehension of the system that you were trying to imagine. So a few tools in your toolbox. Again, man, these are like core WSN activities. To be a good systems thinker, cultivate curiosity. Always ask yourself new questions. Never assume that you've gotten to the end of the road, because it's not a road. It's a circular, mixed up, three-dimensional ball of yarn, and it will always be unraveling until the end of time. And that just means the end of humanity, not the end of everything else. Embrace ambiguity. Systems are often, they will often confound us because we just are trained to think linearly. And so the more interactions, the more interdependencies that exist in a system, the more ambiguous it's going to feel to you as the onlooker. Challenge all of your assumptions, even the most basic assumptions you have. Like sometimes you have to dig really deep to find those foundational assumptions that may be blinding you to things that are happening within the system. Or assumptions you're not making. Like one of my favorites is, what would the world look like if we all assumed that every human was trying to do good? Like how would that change how we understand the system? Taking a holistic perspective, so really resisting that drive to boil things down. It's what you get promoted for. It's what you, I mean, it's totally against, it's irrational within the context of our current culture, but just keep pulling, keep stepping back. Um, and then taking an iterative approach. We're trained to make a dash to the finish line. There's some, we are going to restore the health of the forest in 10 years by thinning acres of forest. Practically, that's probably not true. But gosh, it makes a good political soundbite. Systems are constantly in motion, so the best we can do is perturb them, poke them. We can poke them here and there, as Jamie was talking about earlier. Ideally, we are doing that in a way that is identifying where we think there are leveraging points where we can do a little poke that will have an amplified impact. Systems are always trying to find balance, and frankly, your best opportunity for change is when they're not in balance. A system that's out of balance is we talk about the climate tipping point. The theory is that our Earth system can maintain its balance as long as we don't increase the temperature by a certain amount. Once we do, we hit a tipping point, and then our systems are in chaos. And then the system will either figure out how to rebalance itself, or it will turn into something new. And that is, there will be suffering and there will be pain, and it is scary, and it's also ripe with opportunity. And how we get there is by being in it all the time and poking the system at every chance we have in a constructive way, trying to find the leveraging points and to help keep that system moving and flowing in a direction that we think will improve things for everyone and everything. So this should be really familiar. Every cohort saw this diagram. I keep it on my desktop because it's a quick reference point that you know if you're banging your head against the proverbial brick wall and you're trying to figure something out, I just run through these and I ask myself, okay, what are the interconnections here that I haven't considered? Where are there relationships that I may not have accounted for? Am I thinking about this in that A plus B equals C model, or am I imagining that there are all sorts of things moving and functioning all at the same time? Circular for me is a misnomer because it's not even a circle. It's a three-dimensional motion of all sorts of things and all sorts of relationships. Am I trying to stay comfortable in my silo? I'm a water person. Am I trying to like limit my thinking to what I know in my silo, or am I opening myself up to being embarrassed because I'm thinking about and talking about and trying to understand things that I am not an expert in because it's impossible to be an expert in everything and virtually everything is connected. So am I allowing for that natural organic emergence, or am I feeling like I need to stay in actually what I love in our California state government, the term is, am I swimming in my lane or am I frolicking across the whole pool? People don't like frolickers in organizations because you're disrupting. Um, Am I looking at just one piece of the puzzle, or am I trying to put all the pieces together? Am I trying to see the full picture that's before me, knowing that the edges, often the opportunities exist at the edges of what you can see? Am I being analytical or am I synthesizing? You know, am I trying to drill down to that one thing that causes everything else, or am I trying to figure out how all of the things relate to each other and become something more than all of the individual parts? And then am I looking at something in isolation or am I looking at it in relationship to everything around it? I would love to hear anyone who has, well, anyone, whether you've been through our cohort experience or not, has anyone pulled this out and used this in your work? You can be honest.
I've definitely referenced this before, but more so just like in life.
Yeah, Debbie, I actually don't remember seeing this, but cohort two was quite a while ago. I do viscerally remember Odin having these posters of all the different roles of people like in an ecological system. So, for example, like some people are pollinators and they spread ideas from different silos. And so I do remember that very well, but I actually don't remember this graphic.
Same, Morgan.
Yeah.
So maybe cohort two, you missed out on it. I mean, there's what's on the page and then there's what actually happened. So it could be that for whatever
Yeah,
reason.
like the concepts here we for sure discussed. I just don't remember this exact visual.
Gotcha. Well, so however you learned systems thinking, how has that influenced your work, or how have you brought that into your work?
I think the difficulty is you can recognize, and I appreciate you saying like when a system's in chaos, it's its best opportunity for change because I don't think I've had that optimistic outlook when I'm looking at larger systems. I mean, specifically, um, it's so easy to see the dysfunction in systems rather than what's going well, and definitely could take a more optimistic approach.
I do a lot of planning work, and so it's welcomed by many of my clients to really help them think about those connections and try to bring some of these analyses together, individual analysis and capital projects that they're focused on into a larger coordinated strategy. And so these visuals are a really useful tool of mine. Not necessarily this one, because actually in cohort one, I don't think you put them all together either,
Oh,
Debbie,
wow.
for this. I don't remember it, but I remember the concepts. But yeah, these visuals are how I ensure that the scope of work that I'm trying to pursue is not taken apart by a scalpel, whatever, surgically disassembled into a more, parts type of piece of work that I don't want to do.
Gotcha. Ren?
Yeah, thanks, Debbie. Thanks for showing this. I don't know where this conversation goes, so I have no idea where the system conversation discussion is about to lead us. I will just kind of note, like by our own definitions, if we're operating on this definition of reductive and systems almost as a binary like set of thinking, this to me is reductive thinking of systems thinking, which is actually useful. And this is like the challenge that I'm interfacing with right now, is that this is reductive, right? This takes what's basically an unmappable amount of complexity then puts it into a reductive framework about a system that is not reductive, right? And this kind of gets to what Jamie's saying as well, which is like when I think of systems thinking, it's not, has very little value when it gets into an action. So like
Mm.
without reducing it to an approachable framework. So like if we're going to say that systems is a higher level, like a meta of this, like this sort of similar, this all of a sudden is useful to the thinker because it's reduced to an approachable framework. And I would just get like everyone that mapped something, they mapped their system, they mapped a reductive representation of that. I'm sure it did, like a reductive representation of that system in a manner that helps convey critical and actionable information to people. So I'm kind of curious as we move forward, like, can we actually stay at this like really amorphous, like structureless idea of systems thinking, or is like the inevitable like conversation is like we drive into like a mechanism to reduce that like this, right? So this is an irony, ultimate irony of systems thinking, maybe.
Yeah, stay tuned, Ren. Kayla?
Yeah, hi. I really like where everybody's kind of got a different perspective about what this portrait makes them think about. But one thing that came up for me is, you mentioned in your work, how does this come up? And I feel like we often focus on the like disassembly, like siloing, and isolation, especially since a lot of work has been remote. Um, it's interesting. I feel like we talk a lot about the disassembly lately rather than the like, or just figuring out ways to become like a little bit more cross collaborative. And that's what came up for me when I was looking at this.
Anyone else?
Oh, I just wanted to comment on the individual that just had shared Rain, I think your name is. I would say this was one of my issues in trying to apply systems thinking lens to water resource management, which it's not even really about managing, but water resource issues and water systems. It's like in order to you try to create a framework and apply it to a project, it's already kind of contradictory to the systems thinking approach. So that's one of my challenges is like being in this construct, this human condition in our modern modern cities and ways of being and having and being able to expand. I kind of feel like I do a in and out zooming all the time, and that's why I say, yeah, it's a work in progress here, but I appreciated the comment, so thanks.
Is someone else going to say something? Yeah, go ahead, Justin.
Hello. Sorry I joined late and I missed a bunch of the context, but I can gather more or less I mean, this is helpful to see your visual representation here, and I get it. my own experience though is that it's not so binary or so dualistic, like either entirely, one side of the picture or entirely the other side of the picture. I feel like it's more of a dialectic, like it's more of a struggle back and forth. And so you have both tendencies within a system. That is the system. It's like the chaotic, stochastic, nature of a system that you have. It's trying to organize and it's trying to disorganize at the same time. And a lot of our institutions and processes are set up to be adversarial, and there's a design to that too. But then eventually there's a judge or an arbiter or someone, or there's a place where someone has to make a decision, someone has to make a call, and things have to come together in some manner. And it's not always that everybody can be, singing kumbaya in the end. Sometimes there are winners and losers. Sometimes there are pros and cons to different approaches, and it's always constantly evolving. A lot of us, I think, we're advocates, so we have to take a particular position, and you can't. You might want to be a system thinker, and you might want to sing kumbaya, but you also have to take a position, and there are certain things that you can't just go along with on behalf of your organization or whoever you're representing, because you'll lose your job, and I mean, that's a difficult thing to deal with when you might like to approach it in this very, philosophical, balanced kind of way, but that's not a way a lot of our systems are set up. So that's my observation.
Yeah, so this is a bridging tool. It is definitely designed to help folks to understand how, what one looks like versus another. When we started, Justin, I started with the punchline that neither of these is good or bad. They're just good for different purposes. And our focus right now is on the systems thinking piece. Also, it is not we this is a work in progress. So what we're doing is figuring out like what does that ethereal systems thinking in its perfect form look like, knowing that we all exist in these institutions and these cultural structures that make it very hard to actually, we can't just snap our fingers and say we're all just going to shift over and figure out how we manage systems. We have to figure out how we bridge between the systems that the human systems that we're in right now and this future. And so in hour 3, we will dig into like how do you actually make this valuable in your day-to-day work, and also what's the potential in this for helping us figure out what comes next. I also want to point out that this comes from an organization called the Unschool, and they are trying to train people to disrupt design. And so this is one of many tools that they have, and we'll send you some resources after the workshop too. But we are borrowing this, so I just wanted to make sure to credit the source. So now we're going to shift over, and Larry is going to talk to us more about what the essence of, or what the important elements would be of an organization that supports systems thinking and systems action. Larry, do you want to take this one?
How much time do we have?
Well, we're way behind, as always.
Well, then I'll make it really short. Again, I'll just say what I said before, that I think all systems, well, if you subscribe to the Donella Meadows definition of systems, like I mentioned in the beginning, it's an interconnected set of elements that is coherently organized in a way that achieves something. If you believe that, then every system has a purpose because it's trying to achieve something. And if it's coherently organized, then there are some organizational principles, underlying that system. So as we think ahead and as we think about building organizations and systems, what kinds of principles do we want to have at the foundation, of those organizations and systems? And these are just a few for you to think about. And they're oftentimes, they're oftentimes not thought about, but they're oftentimes used as people are trying to design new types of systems that are much more just and fair and holistic. So you can see the screen. Let me just ask, are there any questions about any of these? Let me just point out a couple here. The principle of subsidiarity. In any system, in any typical organization, I should say, there is typically a more central part, and there are the peripheral parts of that organization. And so the principle of subsidiarity says that decisions should be made at the most appropriate and closest level to the issue, empowering local autonomy and accountability. Essentially saying that decisions should be made at the most peripheral level at the organization, unless it requires some kind of, oops, what was this?
Sorry about that. Jumped ahead.
Unless it requires some kind of coordination and to be done at the central level of the organization. The next one, reciprocity, simply just means that the whole of the organization has a responsibility to the parts, and likewise, the parts of the organization have a responsibility to the whole. So I'll just stop there. You can see the rest of these.
So Larry, is it fair to say that this is an effort to imagine how an organization can be more aligned with with the larger system of which it's a part?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
So if we were creating a new system or organization, and these were the foundational principles that you wanted to have in that organization, the real difficult part is actually translating these into the actual structure of the organization itself. And that's a lot of my DHawk experience of developing chaotic organizations. So, many organizations, have a mission, a purpose, and a set of values or principles, right? And they espouse that, but they don't take it the next much more difficult step of putting these principles actually into the structure of the organization so that as the organization manifests itself in the work that it does, then it's almost automatic that these things will come to life.
Anyone have other questions for Larry? Or want to talk any more about any of these elements? All right. I suspect we're going to come back to this, Larry, when we get into the breakouts. So I just wanted to offer one real world policy-based effort. So one of the things that I think is challenging is we as humans have narrowed in on our own role in systems when we're actually subject to larger systems. And I, our institutions do not acknowledge that. So it's not, again, it's not like we can leap to a world where we are embedded in the larger systems that we imagine we have control over that we probably don't have control over. But I did, when I worked in the governor's office for the Forest Management Task Force, I was the squeaky wheel who kept saying, if we don't understand the larger system in which we are working to try to improve forest health, then we will fail. And so this was a group of us. This actually was specifically the North Coast folks. And it's not done. We finally stepped back. But I wanted to share this as an example of how hard it is. In the first place, it was really hard to figure out what systems are we talking about? Are we talking about the human systems that are operating in and around our forests? Are we talking about the natural forest systems, which have all sorts of elements that are constantly interacting and interdependent. Humans are just one of the elements in that system. Are we talking about the social system that has gotten us to the place we are with forests and how they've been managed historically? This is to Jamie's point. There's a history and a future here. Like, are we thinking it, are we trying to figure out how to organize the system in that way? What we finally landed on is that what the group of people assembled were able to influence is policy. So we agreed that our first task was purely to map the policy systems that were related to our ultimate goal of achieving fire resilience and forest health. I can't zoom in, unfortunately, but there's the one circle that has the color-coded bubbles that are elements. One of them is sort of the waste and reuse cycle. One of them is our economic and community set of cycles, and one of us is our natural resources set of cycles. And then we realized after the fact, oh, but there's like land use matters. Oh, but housing matters. And also what we realized is that two dimensions, this isn't enough because housing, for example, is related to, there are all of these interrelationships between housing policies.
I never had to
Hey,
get into my own money.
hey, Bill, do you want to mute yourself? Great. So housing has all these relationships because of the policies we have in the state that go both ways. Policies that determine what kind of materials we can use to build houses. Because of the regulatory infrastructure, we actually tend not to use our own woody material in California to build houses. We tend to import it from other places. So there are all these interactions and all these relationships and interdependencies that we could not reflect in our two-dimensional space. So this is as far as we got. We then spent some time, all the diamonds are specific policy documents or laws or specific organizations that are governing some of these things. We did spend some time figuring out like, okay, so is there some opportunity for us to connect at least the people who are working on fire resilience with the people who are working on land use, because land use decisions are creating some of the challenges around fire resilience and vice versa. So we did do some of that. So that was, this is an example of the challenge of bridging the space we inhabit, which is siloed, and the opportunity set that is available if we can zoom out and see the larger systems at play. Any questions on this?
No, but my suggestion would be, don't get lost in the weeds when you see a really complex diagram like this. And I would, again, go back to the purpose. When it says fire resilience and forest health ecosystem, what is the essential purpose that you're trying to achieve with all of this? Okay. One of the great systems thinkers of our time is Meg Wheatley. Have you heard of Margaret Wheatley? She wrote a book called Leadership in the New Science, and then a really wonderful book called A Simpler Way. And she had a very simple question that she was trying to answer. And that is, how do we organize to do the work? And so when you think about, okay, what is the essential purpose of this? And then how do we begin to organize ourselves to do the work? And then all these things will begin to fall into place if you keep that in mind.
So Larry, what the challenge is that every one of these circles has a different set of purposes that are impacting our ability to achieve fire resilience and forest health. And there's no one in this system that can arbitrarily tell every other system, you must fall in line to achieve this one outcome. These are constantly operating subsystems of their own that have their own authorities, their own responsibilities, their own politics, their own understanding of this larger system. And so that's what we were trying to get our arms around. But it's not to say that what you're saying isn't wrong. Like maybe we could have had gathering of all of the people who control these systems and said, hey, you're like, for today, all we want you to do is focus on this one thing. But practically in day-to-day life, even though we might say this, I mean, I was in the governor's office, we controlled everyone, right? No.
Well, I would just say that if you have something like this where you have systems within systems within systems, you're gonna get lost if you don't understand the essential purpose. When D Hawk created Visa, and think of Visa and all the financial institutions, the banks, the countries that are, there's just a multitude of systems within the whole Visa thing, right? But Visa has one essential purpose that they identified in the beginning when they organized Visa, and that was to be the world's premier system for the exchange of value. And when you identify a very clear purpose like that, that becomes your true north. That is always your compass pointing toward true north. So when you get, all involved in creating these complex diagrams and so on, if you begin to get lost and you forget what the essential purpose is of what you're really trying to do, how you're trying to organize to do the work, as Margaret Wheatley says, then it just gets way crazy.
So Larry, when you are designing, I can see how we're coming at this from different angles because you're imagining building something new and I'm imagining managing what is. And so I hear you, like if you're going to build something new, make sure you're clear on what you're doing, and that's a lot easier. What we have in our political system and in our government is lots of what, people thinking what they're doing is the thing, and then where we're losing and creating redundancies and inefficiencies is because we have all of these things functioning at the same time, tripping each other up. So this is all systems thinking. What you're talking about is systems thinking. This is systems thinking. And I would say the purpose
Let
here.
me ask you this question. How do systems become dysfunctional?
So this is, I mean, again, we're going to get into the philosophy here, Larry. I don't think they do. I think humans become dysfunctional. But I'm going to stop because Ren has his hand up.
Oh, it's so I kind of would rather you two do this. But it is related, right? And actually at maybe somewhere between the two like approaches to thinking here. And so like to me, I see utility here. And I can't predict I don't know where the rest of this agenda goes. But to me, like there is an inevitable shift. Like this is cool, right? So you like map out, and to Larry's point, you can map out a level of complexity, and I call it pruning, right? So like when I look at like scenario analysis, like I evaluate like the farther you get onto the tree, the less probable each tree, like into the future, each branch has, and you prune off to make your decisions of where you focus. And then you kind of have the same thing here. It's just not temporal, where you create this really complex structure, but at some point it loses its approachability. And I don't know, Debbie, if like the inevitable shift, if it ever happens, is that eventually like you prune, whether it's like actually in your diagram or like cognitively, you might need to prune focus, right? To get to like you just said, we thought we were going to focus strictly on policy in the scenario that you had. Like, so essentially you did that. You didn't do it physically, you did it cognitively, but essentially you did that. You pruned your tree here. But I don't know. I'm just kind of curious remove the noise and allocate resources appropriately.
Yeah, so the other thing yeah, it's a good question, Ren. And one thing I'll point out is, yes, I'm giving you this one moment snapshot. There was lots of stuff that happened before and after we worked on this. And to be clear, no one went into this with the idea that we were going to create change at this scale. This exercise was really designed to illuminate all of the forces that were occurring that were tripping us up from getting to our goal, which for this purpose was fire resilience and forest health. And then the other thing too was to make us aware of where things needed to happen simultaneously. So our constant frustration in the forest sector that we cannot restart our forest economy in California. And because we came at this from a linear perspective of, oh, here's the list of 10 things we have to do, let's just do them, we were not able to embrace the fact that actually all these things have to happen at the same time. You can't pull the supply out of the forest and not have somewhere for it to go. You can't have somewhere for it to go that it's going to be manufactured and then have no way to get it to market. Like, it's just basic things that as government agencies we were not aware of. So this was really an exercise in awareness.
This we've already kind of really unpacked the definitions of systems thinking. So a big picture, seeing the wholes rather than the parts, seeing patterns of change rather than static snapshots, and understanding the interconnectedness that gives living systems their unique character. I just thought this was an interesting way to phrase it. And so, but really, so we were thinking, or we were working on a systems. Hold on, this is a little busy. Maybe I should go back one before I jump in. Oh, well. Okay, so we were working on like a systems thinking framework designed that could be applied to the water resource management. And this lens that I'm exploring here are it's steps in like an evolving framework. And then I was going to offer some guiding questions that support each phase of the process. And while this represents our current thinking, it's obviously still being defined, and like it's not steps as we've talked about. Really, they provide some type of structure for approaching water challenges from a systems perspective, but more of the kind of iterative adaptive management aspects of even trying to apply a framework to a system. So they're only that I put them in this way just because they're interconnected. They're not in a line, but even all these parts are interconnected. And so I guess the idea was kind of if someone has their project, their water system, how would you start to approach it? Well, you would start by thinking bigger without even having the steps. But in this case, like if on the far left at the top, it's kind of defining the system boundary. And so imagine like you're standing on the hilltop looking down at a watershed. And so like linear thinking would have you see the boundaries, the county lines, the property borders, the jurisdictional limits. And so systems thinking asks you to see something different, like to look beyond the lines. And in water resource management, we often draw boundaries around jurisdictional lines and water districts, municipal borders, regulatory authorities. So here it's like the questions are like kind of where does the system really begin and where does it end? And the truth is that there's no boundaries, although to apply it to a specific project, the questions that come to mind around helping with that are kind of what are the physical, ecological, and social limits of the water system or project, more than just our siloed group or siloed division in this sector. And what are the key components with the system, such as water sources or infrastructure and interested parties. And so it's kind of lightly, loosely defining the system that we're going to be looking at. And as we've expressed here, I mean, we're all part of all systems in a sense, or we're all part of a system. And a water management project or a water system project, does have certain characteristics that are looking to be addressed. So that's where I was like saying earlier, it's like big picture systems thinking and then trying to apply that into a discrete project. And so another element rather than maybe a step is identifying the interconnections. So seeing water systems through a systems thinking lens like really calls for the recognition of the connections between surface water, groundwater, infrastructure systems, and human communities. And so I'm applying this to water systems, but obviously this approach here is beyond that as well, bigger than that. So say the management decision to increase groundwater pumping affects stream base flow, and water pricing policies influence conservation behaviors. Infrastructure investments create decades of operational constraints. So kind of by mapping these interconnections, we can kind of move from reactive to proactive in creating a solution that's more sustainable. And these aren't separate issues. I mean, they're a complex dance of interactions, like each movement affecting countless others. And so questions that come to mind when thinking about identifying these interconnections are like, how do different components of the system influence each other? And what feedback loops exist within the system? And how do they influence system behavior? I have maybe a less busy slide. Um, Ooh, well, oh yeah, because that's really what it's like. I was gonna say, I forgot I had that one in here. It's like, I'm going through steps in approaches, but like really this is the system, well, this is a picture, a systems thinking diagram of an environmental restoration project. But so whoops. Okay, those were I'm skipping. So this is just to kind of pare down so it's not so busy. So on aspect 3, and they're numbered, but they don't go in a sequential order. This is for presentation purposes. So, like understanding the system dynamics. So, as we are all aware, systems aren't static. They're dynamic entities, kind of with their own rhythms and responses. So, like a small change in one area can create massive shifts elsewhere. Like dropping a petal in a pond, and that ripple expands beyond that initial point of impact. So when talking about system dynamics, we're essentially asking like, how does this water system behave over time? And this goes kind of beyond those static snapshots and kind of requires us to really understand patterns and behaviors and evolving relationships, really. And understanding or questioning or contemplating, how does the system change over time? And that's like considering time delays and like nonlinear responses, like tipping points, which we were mentioning earlier. Like a watershed may absorb pollutants with minimal like visible impact, and then suddenly it crosses a threshold where the entire ecosystem collapses. So really considering what are some of these other types of tipping points, or and acknowledging that water systems operate simultaneously at multiple scales and with complex interactions between them. And so I really appreciated the comment earlier, Larry, too, of like not getting too lost in the weeds either with all of this, but just, aspects to kind of contemplate. So, and when understanding the system dynamics, it's like, what are the driving forces and like trends and patterns that influence the system? And how do external factors impact the system dynamics? And so, of course, including onto the next one, including interested or impacted parties' perspectives. I mean, that's all throughout this whole experience. But a system is more than physical connections, right? It's also about the people. So I think effective water resource management requires understanding diverse perspectives. Like it's the agricultural users, it's the environmental advocates, urban suppliers, recreational interests. So like each interested or impacted party experiences the system differently with their own unique values, knowledge, and concerns. So by integrating these perspectives, solutions can be developed that address multiple needs and build broader support for implementation. And so it's questions to think on this stage are like, who are the interested and impacted parties that are involved, and what are their interests and objectives? And is their voice involved? More than just knowing that, are they engaged in a way to actually know? And how do those that are involved, I say interested and impacted just because some folks are going to be impacted by the choice of a water management decision. So how do the interested and impacted parties perceive and like interact with the system or the issue, and where are their roles and responsibilities? And then to kind of, and I'm going kind of faster, so I'm trying to make it even faster, but, and then identifying system goals, like what does success look like? Not just for one group, but for the entire system or project. So instead of optimizing, say, for a single objective, like lowest cost, system thinking encourages water resource managers or those involved to pursue multiple interconnected goals, like such as, with reliability, equity, environmental health, economic vibrance. So this expanded version transforms water management from a zero-sum game to an opportunity for creating shared value across sectors and those involved or impacted. And so questions might be like, what are the desired outcomes and objectives for sustainable water resources management? And like, what does success, that's a hard one for me to say fast. What does success look like for the entire system? And the second part of this framework is kind of in water resource management. We often design systems with like fixed capacity and like static rules. But the reality is that water availability and demand patterns, environmental conditions, they're all constantly changing. So the systems thinking challenges us to build feedback mechanisms and like adaptive capacity into our management approaches. And it's like a thought that, or an example I was thinking about earlier was like managing water levels or operating a reservoir. It typically follows like very rigid rules based on historical data. But like what happens when the precipitation patterns shift, or like when upstream land use changes, when downstream demand evolves, like without proper like feedback mechanisms, the management approaches become misaligned with reality or unsuccessful, or at least challenged. So this could look like implementing monitoring networks. So applying, identifying disconnects and leverage points. It's like it could look like implementing monitoring networks that track changing conditions, or creating flexible allocation frameworks that adjust to drought or surplus, or developing infrastructure with adaptive capacity, and establishing like governance structures that can learn and evolve, which is like those structures going past our regular defined jurisdictions. And then this in turn can create a water system that's more resilient. And so how does the system respond to changes and disturbances? And what adaptive strategies and mechanisms are in place to manage uncertainty and promote resilience? And then getting to kind of identifying disconnects and leverage points. Every system has moments of incredible potential, like places where a small intervention can create transformative change. So I feel it's important to address system disconnects as well, as such, so the disconnects and the leverage points, so that like misalignment between, say, hydrologic and jurisdictional boundaries, or separation of land use and water management, the fragmentation of water and energy management. Like there are these disconnects. And so to ask, like, what are the disconnects or inefficiencies within the system? Where can small interventions create meaningful change? And like, what are the leverage points or opportunities for intervention to address these disconnects? And that's leading to developing integrated solutions that, solve multiple challenges simultaneously. And I'll just go faster for the last two, sorry. So evaluating the impacts and the trade-offs. So water resource decisions create effects across like multiple systems and timeframes. And systems thinking requires us to comprehensively assess these interconnected outcomes, like trying to balance short-term operational goals and long-term sustainability, while considering, quantifiable metrics and like less tangible community values, and then weighing the trade-offs. So what are some potential social, economic, and environmental impacts of proposed interventions, and how can decision making be informed by a holistic understanding of these impacts and trade-offs? And then just to wrap this part is really that iterate and learn, the adaptive management approach to our projects, to our systems, to whatever it is that we're working on. Water resource management is never finished. I mean, the conditions change, knowledge evolves, and new challenges emerge. So by learning, by including like learning cycles into management frameworks, regular plan updates, scenario testing, interested party feedback loops. Then water professionals can create adaptive systems that improve over time rather than becoming obsolete. So the last two questions here is like, how can insights from system analysis and interventions that were assessed in the pre-part of the planning inform ongoing learning and improvements, and maybe what monitoring and evaluation mechanisms are needed to track progress and be able to implement adaptive strategies over time or adapt the strategies. So, okay, I'll pause there. Thank you. Because no, sorry, then we were going to go to
No,
Jamie about a real world example, but I will pause for that.
yeah, no, I don't think so. I think that's
Okay.
good. I mean, I think that's the framework that we developed as a work group, and we have a real world sort of water infrastructure kind of planning, engineering, design challenge that we've been working through as a application strategy. Let's apply this framework to a problem that we see really regularly in California. We could talk about that later in a little bit more detail, but that was the strategy that our work group put together, was to build this framework and apply it to a problem. So you want to go, Larry? You want to talk a little bit, Debbie? Back to you. I think, to see how we want to round out this workshop framework here.
Yeah, so Larry, do you want to share with us your example? And then again, like I said, we'll come back and then drill into a specific example together.
Well, in the interest of time, I think what I'll do is just forego talking about food systems and keep the focus on water. I was going to share with you this food systems model that we developed a number of years ago called the Food Commons. And I have this beautiful concept paper that we put together that I will share with Debbie, and then she can send it out to any of you that are interested. But the Food Commons was a new model for a wholly integrated local or regional food system at mid-scale level, designed to bring local, healthy, sustainable food and make it more affordable and accessible to people and communities. Anyway, so I'm not gonna go there, but rather I think I'm just gonna briefly share with you my experiences with DHawk, because I think that has some real relevance to where we're at with California water today. So I won't bother to tell you how I got connected with DHawk, but back in 1996, I took a sabbatical leave from the University of California and hooked up with DHawk now, and spent a year in kind of like an apprentice or intern, and traveled with D all over the country, working with various groups and either redesigning or conceiving new kinds of organizations based on his concepts of organizations and systems. In fact, one of the groups, Melissa, that we worked with was Peter Senge, when he had, after the great success of his book, The Fifth Discipline, he created the Center for Organizational Learning at MIT, and was having after 5 or 6 years, he was having a terrible time of that center doing what he really had envisioned. So he asked D and me to come in to help him redesign that. Anyway, so who's DHawk? DHawk was a banker in Seattle. This is back in the late 60s. And back during the 60s, a lot of the major financial institutions, big banks and so on, they were all trying to create their own credit card systems, and none of them were working. They were failing miserably and losing bazillions of dollars. So they called this big meeting of all of these finance managers and bankers and whatnot, and they said, "Oh my God, this is a mess. What are we going to do?" And they created a committee, and DHawk was put on that committee. And they said, "Okay, you guys think of something. Go create a new system that might work for credit cards." So Dee Hawk and a small group of people worked for a 2-year period, and they came up with Visa. And you need to know that Dee, more than being a banker or a credit card person, he was really an organizational and systems thinking genius. He had studied organizations for a long time, and and Dee really felt that many of the problems we're faced in the world today are because of what we're experiencing with our institutions. And he would say we are experiencing massive institutional failure. Oops, excuse me. My ducks are calling. And what he meant by that was that we have these huge institutions, whether they be academia or business or government, and they're sucking up lots of resources, yet they aren't being relevant to the problems of the day. And he said the reason why these institutions are failing is because of the way that they are structured. And if you look at the way that most of our institutions are structured in the world today, they're these hierarchical, pyramids where all of the decision making and control and the power resides at the top, right? It's a top down hierarchical command and control type of organization. And he says these types of organizations are not capable of dealing with the really complex problems of today. We need a new type of organizational structure. And so he came up with this idea. He had studied complexity science, and he came up with this idea of a chaotic organization. And as I said earlier, he coined this word by just mixing chaos and order. That complexity science tells us that all evolution and growth and change happens at that balance point between chaos and order. And therefore, we need to create a new type of structure for that. And so he, when he created Visa, it was really, well, he used a lot of these organizational concepts. And so Visa, when you look at how it was structured in the beginning, was very innovative and very different than the way it is today. Unfortunately, it's slid back and become more of a conventional organizational structure. But anyway, Dee and his committee created Visa. They launched Visa, I think it was 1968, thereabouts. And then he became the CEO of Visa for the next 15 years and took it, as you know, international and created this fantastic, credit card organization that served all of these financial institutions. So Visa is a for-profit, non-stock membership corporation. And and so after Dee spent 15 years, being the CEO of Visa, he really kind of burned himself out and retired to a ranch south of San Francisco and hung out for 10 years, just recharging his batteries and away from the world. But people who knew of his organizational genius, encouraged him to come back out and share his chaotic ideas with the world. And that's when I hooked up with him in 1996 when he was coming out of retirement. And so it was just a fascinating year for me. It totally turned my life upside down. And, ever since then, I have been using lots of stuff that I learned from Dee in my approach to creating new initiatives and new organizations and so on. And so what I want to say to you from my experience with California water is this. I think the way that California water is structured and governed in this state is a hot mess. It is not working. If you go back to the way that the water system or the water structure in California started, there were some patterns that started early on that worked fine back then for a California of maybe 1 million people, 100 years ago, but it just does not work now. Okay. For example, there was a law way back when that said, when you drill a well, and you have 3 or more users using the water from that well, then you have to create a mutual water district. So why on the water supply side of things do we have what between 400 and 500 water districts, all these little fiefdoms that are controlling our water supply around California, right? Why do we have some money? Because of that original law. So when I got involved on the regional water board and started to learn more about the water world, and then got involved in water supply issues here in the Ojai Valley, and then knowing what I know about organizations and systems and so on that I learned mostly from D. Hawk, I just thought, wow, the way California water is structured and governed is we really need a whole new system. How we get there, how we do that, I don't know, but I think the present system is having tremendous difficulty and failing in many ways and is not serving us well. So at that, I'll just stop there and see what kind of questions you might have.
I think that's a great place, actually, Larry. First off, I think anyone disagree with Larry's supposition at the end that our water system is a mess? Anyone think, no, we're good? Okay, great. Was somebody gonna, so in water, for those of you who are not familiar with our culture, we want people to speak up and share what you think. Like, don't feel like you're being steamrolled. If you really believe we're on a good path, share, maybe help us understand. But assuming that we're all on the same page here, what I would like to propose is that we do break into 2 groups. One group that focuses in on how you apply systems thinking within our existing structure, because I feel like the work that our holistic systems thinking work group has been doing is trying to really tussle with assuming that the structure we have, as broken as it is, but there are ways that we can bring systems thinking into that structure and help us to do better within that structure. And so that's Oh, I am having a really hard time with messaging today. I sent a text message to people who are not part of this saying, hey, let's figure out what comes next. And they're like, what are you talking about? And then apparently I sent a message just to Alyssa. Thank you for sharing that. So let's have a group focus in on like what can we do within our existing structures? And then let's have a group that thinks about what could systems thinking help us imagine as a structure that might serve us better. And again, all of this is systems thinking. It's systems thinking at different scale with different boundaries on it. It's all the same mental process, but just there are those of us who day to day have to live within a certain set of rules, which I completely appreciate. And so there's value in figuring out how do you deploy systems thinking within those contexts. And then I also think that for all of our benefit in the longer term of human survival in this place, it'd be nice if we had folks who were also trying to imagine, like, what does the next thing, like, what does this look like if we could take a step back and apply systems thinking more broadly and come up with ways that we organize humans to be better actors within that context.
Can I make a suggestion?
Yes, absolutely.
So, if you look at California water, there's 3 major systems, right? There's our water supply system. There is our wastewater sewer system, right? And then there's our stormwater system, right? Aren't those the 3 major water systems?
There are more than that, Larry.
Okay, well, just take those 3. So if we were to focus on the water supply side of things, how would you completely reimagine that side of things be structured and organized differently than the way it is in order to deal much better with, our water supply and demand issues?
So Larry, can I suggest that
Debbie,
yes.
I got to say goodbye.
Oh, thank you,
I
Bill,
gotta
for
get going,
participating.
and I'll talk to you later.
Sounds good.
Bye,
I'll
Bill.
show you the picture I drew.
Oh yeah. Wait, did you want to share the picture?
Huh?
Did you want to share your picture?
I gotta get going right now
Okay. All right.
because I
Well,
need to explain it
all right.
and but I gotta be in Don Pedro at 2 o'clock.
We'll I'll follow up with you later to get a look at your picture.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye,
Take care,
everyone.
Bill.
So Larry, how about if we start that conversation from the broader perspective? Because I would suggest that part of how we've gotten into the conditions we're in is by trying to bifurcate that drop of water and into supply and stormwater and recycled water and all the different ways that we've cut that little drop into a million pieces and imagine that somehow quality could be managed separately for like if we could start from the broader perspective, it may be that as we look at the broader system, we decide that where humans can leverage is different than the broader system. But I would suggest that even though it's messy, it's good to have at least an idea of what that broader system looks like before you start narrowing in.